Good evening. The Western Allies have carried out their... Good afternoon. I'm Lee Lin Chin with a special SBS World News report. Good evening. Lee Lin Chin with SBS World News.
Before she vanished from Australian television, she left behind not a farewell, not a single explanation, only silence. For someone whose voice once carried across millions of homes, her quiet exit was louder than any headline. Why did Lee Lin Chin, the most flamboyant, unpredictable, and fashion-defying figure in Australian news broadcasting, walk away without a word? This is not just the story of a resignation. It is the unraveling of a mystery that has haunted SBS and intrigued an entire generation of viewers. She wasn't just a newsreader. She was a cultural icon, a fashion rebel, a rare Asian Australian face in a sea of uniform anchors, a woman who dared to wear silver capes, oversized sunglasses, and avant-garde designer jackets while reporting the news. Yet, in 2018, she left. No tell-all interview, no memoir, no scandal publicly admitted, just gone. Some claimed it was age. Others whispered about internal conflicts, creative suffocation, even discrimination. Those close to the industry hinted at deeper tensions behind the glittering wardrobe and biting on-air wit, tensions that may have finally broken the icon. This is a story of legacy, rebellion, and perhaps betrayal. And by the end of this video, one thing will become clear. Lee Lin Chin didn't just resign. She may have been pushed out of the very system she once lit on fire. For decades, Australian television had a predictable face, composed, Western, conventional. And then came Lee Lin Chin, an enigmatic woman with a sharp tongue, angular couture, and a delivery that felt more like performance art than nightly news. Born in Singapore and migrating to Australia in the late 1970s, she joined SBS, a multicultural network that seemed the perfect home for someone like her. But what began as a fitting match would eventually become a strange and silent divorce. Lee Lin Chin started her SBS journey in 1980. At first, she worked behind the scenes, producing radio content, but it wasn't long before her striking presence and unmistakable voice moved her in front of the camera. By the 1990s, she had become the face of world news, her signature accent, a blend of colonial English and something all her own, becoming an odd comfort in living rooms across the country. And her style? It was unapologetically eccentric. The fashion world watched in awe. She wore garments more suited for Paris runways than newsroom desks, from asymmetrical robes to architecturally structured blazers, all curated by Chin herself. Every appearance was a statement. But behind the flamboyance, Lee Lin Chin represented something far more important. She was a rare non-white woman, anchoring primetime news in Australia, a country still grappling with multicultural identity and representation. She stood out not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. And instead of blending in, she leaned into the spotlight and made herself unforgettable. Yet, that uniqueness also made her vulnerable. Over time, murmurs began to surface. Despite her cult following, she was never given a leadership position. Younger, more traditional faces were fast-tracked into prominence while Chin remained a cultural curiosity. She was celebrated, but not always respected. There were reports that SBS had grown uncomfortable with her growing fame outside the newsroom, especially after her appearances on comedy skits and viral segments that showcased her sass and wit. These moments earned her younger fans, but reportedly didn't sit well with the network's more conservative executives. And then, one day in 2018, it ended. No public fallout, no tribute segment, just a short, impersonal announcement that Lee Lin Chin had resigned after nearly 40 years. The woman who redefined what it meant to be a newsreader in Australia disappeared, and SBS seemed eager to move on. What happened behind the scenes? Was it truly her decision, or was there more beneath the surface? Something darker, something unspeakable. Lee Lin Chin's early years in broadcasting were quiet, almost invisible. Arriving in Australia in the 1980s, she began at SBS Radio, doing voiceovers and producing content. Her transition to television wasn't explosive. It was subtle, organic, and for years, she existed in the margins of a system not built for someone like her. But slowly, she carved out space, becoming a weekend news presenter for SBS World News. It wasn't a primetime slot, but it became hers. In the early 2000s, something shifted. Her style, both in fashion and delivery, grew bolder, less filtered, more avant-garde. She wore high collars, velvet capes, and futuristic glasses. Her cadence was odd, staccato, and poetic. Her pauses felt deliberate, like punctuation in a performance. At first, many didn't understand it. But then, people began to watch because of it. She wasn't just reading news, she was curating presence. Younger generations began to notice. Social media turned her into a meme, then into a legend. She began appearing in comedy sketches for The Feed, a youth-focused SBS program. These skits reimagined her as a whiskey-drinking, insult-hurling, hyper-self-aware diva. A caricature, perhaps, but one she embraced fully. Lee Lin Chin became more than a name. She became a persona, layered, theatrical, untouchable. Her skits went viral. In one, she ran for prime minister. In another, she claimed to control global fashion trends. She delivered punchlines like weapons, dry, lethal, absurdly brilliant. It was a reinvention no one expected from a news anchor in her 60s, and it worked. At the Logie Awards in 2016, she became the first SBS personality ever nominated for the Gold Logie, Australia's top television honor. But beneath the applause, tensions brewed. Colleagues noted an increasing friction between Chin's on-air persona and the network's management. While she brought visibility and relevance to SBS, especially among younger audiences, her unconventional image began to test the boundaries of what SBS considered appropriate. Rumors began to swirl that her involvement in comedy skits, while beloved by fans, was not universally supported within the newsroom. Some felt she was blurring the line between journalism and entertainment. There were whispers that she was being sidelined, quietly, that younger, more traditional anchors were being prioritized for key segments, that her role was being reduced, not due to lack of skill or relevance, but due to discomfort with her growing cultural power. As she gained traction outside SBS, the network seemed less eager to promote her from within. In meetings, insiders later claimed Chin was outspoken. She defended her choices, her image, her right to be both informative and expressive. But the institutional response was muted. She remained the weekend anchor, still in her time slot, still in her corner, as if SBS didn't quite know what to do with the unpredictable force they had helped create. And then, without warning, she left. The announcement came in July 2018. Lee Lin Chin was stepping down. No farewell episode, no official reason. Just a brief press release and a simple statement. After nearly 30 years presenting SBS World News, Lee Lin Chin has decided to step aside. The silence was deafening, and the public, loyal and loud, began asking, why would a woman at the peak of her cultural relevance just vanish like that? The resignation of Lee Lin Chin was wrapped in elegance, but to those who watched closely, it reeked of quiet exile. There was no scandal on paper, no headline of misconduct or controversy, but absence, in her case, became its own kind of noise. And beneath that silence lay stories that no official channel dared to confirm. Multiple industry insiders began to speak, off record, always guarded. According to one producer who had worked with Chin for over a decade, the tension wasn't new. Lee Lin had become bigger than SBS itself, the source said, and some people weren't comfortable with that. Another senior staffer suggested that Chin's rising pop culture fame through the feed made executives uneasy. They liked her when she was quiet, quirky, controllable. But once she started becoming a brand of her own, it shifted. Behind the scenes, there were suggestions of subtle marginalization. Her role on the news desk remained static, never promoted, never expanded, despite her celebrity status. While younger, less experienced anchors were given weekday slots and bigger segments, Chin was left on the weekend bench. She played the part gracefully, but close friends say it gnawed at her. Then came the rumors, deeply unsettling, if true. Some whispered she had been pressured to tone down her fashion. Others said she was asked to scale back her comedy sketches, even though they were drawing a younger, more diverse audience to the network. When she refused, those opportunities dried up. She was being shrunk on purpose, said one anonymous SBS staff member, because she refused to shrink herself. Was it ageism, racism, misogyny? Perhaps all of them, fused in the most insidious corporate way, the quiet suggestion that you're not a fit anymore. In her final months, Chin grew more withdrawn. While she continued to appear professional on camera, colleagues noted a new heaviness in her demeanor. In one of her last pre-recorded interviews, she hinted at disillusionment. "I think there's a limit to how much difference one person can make in an organization," she said cryptically. Eventually, the walls pushed back. But she never spoke about it again. The public, meanwhile, responded with grief and confusion. On Twitter and Facebook, fans demanded answers. "Thank you, Lee Lin" trended nationwide. Celebrities from various industries paid tribute. Comedian Nazim Hussain called her a national treasure who never got her due. The Sydney Morning Herald published an editorial asking whether Australia had failed to protect one of its most original talents. But SBS remained firm in its statement. She left of her own accord. End of story. Except, the story didn't end. Her absence became a myth. Rumors spread that she had been pushed out in a behind-the-scenes shakeup, that her rebellious streak had made her unmanageable, that she simply grew tired of being celebrated while simultaneously contained. She never confirmed any of it, and that silence became her most powerful statement. In an industry where legacy is often overwritten by branding, Lee Lin Chin's disappearance left a hole, not just on screen, but in the soul of Australian media. She had been a beacon for immigrants, for creatives, for outsiders, and then gone. But even in absence, her legend only grew louder. At Aussie Uncovered, we don't just look at fame, we look beneath it. And when it comes to Lee Lin Chin, we see more than a fashion icon or a viral sensation. We see a woman who challenged the very template of Australian broadcasting and paid the quiet price for it. For years, Chin stood as a paradox. She was both respected and sidelined, celebrated and compartmentalized. In an industry long dominated by whiteness, conformity, and polished neutrality, she dared to be bold, ethnic, and defiantly expressive. Her presence alone disrupted the aesthetic of Australian news, and for that, she became indispensable to viewers, and perhaps inconvenient to her employers. We believe Chin's resignation was not just a career decision, it was the result of a prolonged institutional discomfort. The network admired her surface value, but not her autonomy. They could tolerate her difference, as long as it remained within the boundaries they quietly defined. But when her cultural power outgrew those boundaries, when the public began to revere her for more than just her job title, the unspoken pushback began. This isn't just about one woman. It's about what happens when someone refuses to dilute themselves for the comfort of a system that was never built for them. Chin didn't conform. She didn't soften her edges. She wore them, literally, on national television. And for a while, that worked, until it didn't. Could SBS have done more to nurture and protect her space? To amplify her voice rather than just showcase it? We think so. The handling of her departure, muted, dismissive, distant, reveals more than any press statement ever could. It tells us that institutions still struggle with brilliance that doesn't come in expected packaging. And yet, despite that, or perhaps because of it, Lee Lin Chin remains unmatched. No one has replaced her, because no one can. Her legacy isn't built on ratings or tenure. It's built on resistance, on style as protest, on the audacity to remain radically herself in a space that demanded homogeneity. Now we turn to you, the audience who grew up watching her, laughing with her, admiring her. What did Lee Lin Chin mean to you? Do you believe her exit was truly voluntary, or was it the end of a quiet battle that had lasted years too long? Because in the end, her silence may have said more than any closing monologue ever could. Some departures echo louder than arrivals. Lee Lin Chin didn't need a grand farewell or a spotlight exit. Her silence was deliberate, enigmatic, and deeply powerful. It forced us to look closer, to question what we thought we knew about legacy, visibility, and value in Australian media. There is something haunting about her disappearance from the screen she once owned. One Sunday she was there, commanding attention in a sculptural jacket and steel-eyed stare. The next, she wasn't. No fanfare, no curtain call, only an absence that refused to explain itself. And perhaps that's exactly how she wanted it. Lee Lin Chin was never just a newsreader. She was performance. She was punctuation in a world of monotone sentences. Her outfits weren't fashion, they were defiance. Her tone wasn't accidental, it was calculated elegance, sometimes parody, always control. She redefined what it meant to belong on screen, especially for women of color, for immigrants, for those who never saw themselves reflected in the 6 p.m. bulletin. Now she lives in fragments, GIFs, memes, quotes, Logi clips, whispered stories of backstage resistance. And in those fragments, a new kind of permanence takes root. Not the kind built by institutions, but by people. Viewers, admirers, outsiders who finally saw someone not just allowed to be different, but unapologetically proud of it. She never told us why she left. She didn't need to, because some stories, when told too directly, lose their power. And Lee Lin Chin always knew the value of mystery. She is gone from the desk, but not forgotten. Some stories are never told, but now you know.